Want to know where God is? This is a wild story in Exodus. It really is wild. God's people were in bondage and slavery for centuries because Joseph went to Egypt, because his brothers didn't like him, and they tried to kill him or sell him off into slavery, and he became the king's favorite person and became the king's cupbearer, which means he got to test whether the king was drinking poison or not. Who wants that job? That was his. And Joseph became like prolific and had lots of kids, and his progeny grew, and suddenly Israel was really super strong inside Egypt, and the Egyptians hated that. So they enslaved the Israelites. And they enslaved the Israelites for a super long time. And the Israelites grumbled and complained and moaned and prayed to God, and the story in Exodus and also in Numbers tells us that God heard their cry, and God was like, I am going to let my people go. You know that song, Go Down Moses, way down in Egypt land? That spiritual is about the Exodus and about God doing everything God could in God's power to release the people. Sent Moses to do a duel, if you will, with Pharaoh, and kind of plague after famine, after frogs, after blood, all of these ways God used to try to get Pharaoh's attention. Nothing happened until all the firstborn children were killed. And then Pharaoh decided to let God's people go. And as soon as they got their stuff, their kids, their things, their horses, their cows, as soon as they got all their stuff and got moving across the desert, y'all saw the movie, but this is how it went. The story is that the Pharaoh's army, came crashing down on Israel anyway. And backed up against the Red Sea, God instructed Moses to lift up his staff, and the sea parted. And the people went through on dry land. And then the water came back over. Another spiritual Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. I'm singing, Mary, don't you weep, Martha, don't you moan. So now, God has promised God's people this land of milk and honey, and they send 10 spies ahead to look at the land and see if they can get in the land and, frankly, take the land. And the spies say, those people are too tall. We are not having a fight with those people. And God feels like the people have disobeyed God, and they wander in the wilderness now for 40 years. 40 years as kind of like, y'all didn't hear me, y'all didn't believe me, y'all didn't obey me. They're wandering for 40 years. And this text has them wandering in the desert of sin, the wilderness of sin. P.S., by the way, that's not sin like do something bad. That's just the name of the desert. So they're wandering in the desert, moving from place to place to place. They've camped. You know the story, some of you, that they've been hungry and they've moaned and complained. And when they got hungry and moaned and complained, God sent them manna from heaven. And they could boil it or they could bake it, they could broil it. God was good with it. God sent them quail to eat in the desert. And even still, even though God has liberated them, even though God can part the sea so they can go through on dry land, even though God proves God's self to be a delivering, liberating God, these people are not satisfied. They are not happy. They're thirsty, and they go back to complaining, imagining that God has brought them out of the desert and is going to leave them to die. So Moses has a little talk with God. Basically, what am I going to do with these weasels? And God says, I'll tell you what, Moses. I like paraphrasing. I'll tell you what, Moses. Take some of the elders and head out there by those rocks. I think Moses was supposed to take the elders so God could prove who God was. And then you're going to take your staff, that same staff that you used to make the plagues happen, that same staff that you and I used to part the sea, take that same staff and touch the rock, and water is going to break forth. And God tells Moses, I will be standing right there. I will be standing right there. And sure enough, Moses strikes the rock, and here comes the water, and the people's thirsts are quenched. Now, before I say a little bit more about God standing on that rock, I have to, just in full disclosure, take you to the end of this chapter where we still got Moses and God dealing with the staff. Now, in this particular case, there's a war going on, and every time Moses raises his arms, people win. His people. And when he drops his arms, his people lose. Up, down, win, lose. I'm not preaching that today. But if you're reading your Bible, verses 8 through, that's where that is. This staff, this relationship with God, where Moses and God are using that staff to make things happen. Where is God? God. This God of the Exodus. This God of liberation. This God of freedom giving. This God of healing. This God is always showing up. God shows up in a burning bush and calls Moses into ministry. God shows up in a cloud so the people can see their way across the wilderness in the daytime. And then God shows up in a pillar of fire so God can show them the way to the promise at night. God shows up on the mountainside in full visibility, big feet and all. There is God. God shows up for these people in the ability for Moses to listen and hear and guide and take the staff and strike the rock. This God of liberation, this God of deliverance, this God of healing and waymaking, this God of life-altering transformation, this God is always showing up in the fire, on the mountain, in the cloud. God shows up in the cloud up on the mountain, but comes down the mountain in the cloud and hangs out by the meeting tent. Sort of like a reminder that God is real. God is in the rock. God is in the water from the rock. God was in the manna. God is in the roaring sea. God is in the rise and fall of the ocean. God is in the itty-bitty baby born in Bethlehem. Want to know where God is? God is in the child in the cage at the border. God is in the men making 86 cents an hour, making hand sanitizer. God is in the priests and nuns at the border ministering to the people who are being detained. God is in the nurses and doctors and first responders caring for the people at huge risk who have this coronavirus. God is sadly in the man hoarding the sanitizer in the garage. I love that Richard Rohr writes in Universal Christ, a mature Christian sees Christ in everything and in everyone else. This is a definition that will never fail you, and it will always demand more of you and give you no reasons to fight, exclude, or reject anyone. Oh, God's in those people that we don't like. Damn. Even the lying one in the White House? Oh my God, really? Yeah. Yep. And that's not just a message for Christians, it's a message for all of us, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, Jew, agnostic. If there is a God, and I believe there is a God, I really believe there is a God, then Richard Rohr also says God comes to us disguised as our life. Disguised as our life. Like the panic in our life, or the raising of children in our life, or the teaching of school in our life, or the singing of songs in our life, or the running outside really quick for a walk, or the hunker down and not touching each other, or sneaking out like some of my friends did the other day to see a play subversively. Or going to an audition, or breaking the bread of life, or drinking the cup of blessing, or drinking a cup of tea, or drinking a glass of wine, or that yucky stuff that's cabbage liquid. I don't know what that is, that kabuchi stuff. Or taking a bath, or jumping in the ocean, or being baptized, or baptizing somebody. God is there. When you splash in a puddle, when you're bathing your baby, when you're having a baby, Lord, have mercy. When you are parenting, or dying, or living, God is there in your life, extending her heart to you, holding your heart in her hands. Even now, even now. Even now, while we're worried and afraid, even now, God is here. Even now, when I'm worried about my man, because he's in that little demographic, he will be mad if I tell you, but you know what I'm saying? A little vulnerable age group. God is here in the worry and in the way we are going to bicker every time I say, did you sanitize once more? Such that I am on his last damn nerve. A friend sent me a poem from one of our UU colleagues about this pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has come, still reach out with your heart. Know that you're connected in ways that are both terrifying and beautiful. You can hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely this has become clear. Do not reach out your hands, reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. Want to know where God is? In the poet wrestling to make meaning of this time. In the Chinese restaurant owner closing down. In all the gig doers who won't make money in this moment. And all of the parents and friends who'll cook for them and love them and take care of them. God is in this internet thing. God is in all my team who came in to love on you. We are promised this God because we are promised this love. God is this love. God is love for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. For as long as we all shall live. And actually, even in our death. Even in death, because death is a part of life. That's where God is.